So just look at them and sigh, and know they love you. And you of the tender years can know the fears that your elders grew by, and so please help them with your youth. They seek the truth before they can die. Teach your parents well, their children's help will slowly go by, and feed them on your dreams, the one they fix, the one you'll know by. Don't you ever ask them why, if they told you you would cry. So just look at them and sigh, and know they love you.
Ah! Excellent. Good morning, welcome. I love that sound. We'll have another one, yes. Our daughter's almost 22, and we can make her do that sound to make her parents happy.
It would be a miracle.
Yeah. Welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living Toronto. My name is Tanis Burnett. I'm a member of the band. I've been a member here since the dawn of time. And I am not Reverend Jonathan Zenz. He is currently doing service somewhere on a boat in the Caribbean, where there's no snow, no sore muscles from shoveling snow. Yeah. This has been a very snowy week. So good morning, everybody. We have a very special morning today with a very special guest who I will introduce in a little bit. But first, let me get to some announcements. Get that out of the way. Get our business out of the way. Science of Mind classes will not be on for 2 weeks, as Jonathan is. First, he's doing a cruise, and then he's flying to Vancouver for the Centers for Spiritual Living Leadership Conference. So he's there for a week. He'll be back 2 Sundays from now. So classes will resume once he's back. Sunday, February 17th, our guest speaker will be our lovely and talented Helen Velo. So that's next Sunday. Sunday, February 24th, we have a volunteers meeting at 1 p.m. So after service, all volunteers are expected to attend. Thursday, February 28th, the women's group meets at 7 p.m. Mental Muscle Online starts April 1st. Check out our newsletter. We have an electronic newsletter, so if you haven't signed up for that, you can do so at the bookstore. We don't give your email address away to anybody, but every Friday, the e-newsletter comes out. You find out what the talk is for the week, who the practitioners are, anything that's sort of pertinent. So it's a lovely little tool to have in your inbox. But you can go to our newsletter and our website and find out more about Mental Muscle. Help is needed with, oh, yes, the hairdresser up front in our building, she's moving. And our landlord has said, why don't you take the front space? So we're going to move the offices from the basement and the bookstore into the front area, so we'll have more street presence. But till that time, we need a person with demolition and renovation knowledge for some work on our new front space. Contact Deja. Deja is our administrator, to set up a time and meet and get a quote from her. Also, tax receipts will be emailed by February 14th. If anybody is here for the first time, welcome. I won't single you out, but you can go to our bookstore and sign up for our e-newsletter there. Volunteer opportunities. There's plenty. Social media, tech position, youth mentor. For the youth mentor positions, you'll have to speak to Jonathan when he's back. And spiritual mind treatment. For anybody who's new to us, spiritual mind treatment is our term for prayer. It's an affirmative prayer that's spoken in the first person, current tense. That's not the proper word I want, but my brain just present tense. Thank you very much. We believe that. There you go, Jonathan. The wall, us, this stand, all of you, we're part of an energy that we are not separate from. We are all one. Some people call it God. Some people call it universe, spirit, love, life, light, Gladys, George, whatever you call it, whatever is personal to you, that is lovely and that is fine. We don't believe that we are separate from that force. So we don't pray in a manner like, please, if you just be so kind. We don't, that's not how we operate. We come from a place of empowerment, a place of knowledge, and I'd like to say a place of surrender. If you are at a place right now where you're going, I can't quite see my way through that, we have a spiritual mind treatment request box in the front. And you can just fill out the form, put it in there, and know that one of our licensed practitioners, who I would like to introduce now, Mary Ellen Cassie, Margaret Ann Snyder, and Helen Vallot, who is out of town working at the moment. Last Monday night, they did their last step in their training. They took their oral panels, and they all passed, so yahoo! Congratulations. So one of these fine women, as well as Jonathan, who, although he's a minister, he always says first and foremost he is a practitioner, that they will know your truth and they will get her done. And there's a comments box where apparently you can express yourself. And I'm guessing that's out there because I haven't seen it yet. And you can follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at CSL Toronto. Oh, there's one more thing. Hold on. Cosmic Kaleidoscope, the New Thought Conference, May 31st, June 1st, and 2nd in Kamloops. There is information, I'm guessing, on our website. Hi, Deja. I'd like to say hello to anybody who's online. I know we have someone in Cairo. We have people at home in their pajamas. Elliott Lake. We're worldwide, so welcome. Thank you for tuning in. And if you're watching archived, welcome. Thank you. That is it for the business. I would like to call up our licensed practitioner, Mary Ellen Cassie, please. She is going to enlighten us, and then we are going to sing a little bit and get into a quiet place. So I'll leave it with you.
Okay. Just checking with Brian over there. So good morning, everyone. And I'm doing a reading, and it's hard for me to ever let go of my dear friend Ernest Holmes. But this is a book, Discover a Richer Life. And so I'm reading a passage from this. God comes new and direct to everyone who expects him, talks to everyone who listens, and acts through everyone who accepts his creativity. The authority or effectiveness of your word, your prayer, your meditation rests in the action of the law of God, and not in you at all. Just the same as authority you have in the use of gravitational law, and its response does not depend on you as a person. The authority is divine. That authority is an absolute, as you permit it to be. Our experiment is not with the power or the goodness, or the presence or the love of the truth, or the beauty of God, but with ourselves. And so my affirmation this morning from this reading is I am rooted. I am rooted in the living Spirit. always and in all ways. So I ask you to say that out loud with me. I am rooted in the living Spirit, always and in all ways. Blessings.
Thank you. Just take a moment and melt into your seats and listen to the words. And sing along. It's not in the book, but we've done this one. I surrender. I trust, and I know that as I surrender, I fall into the arms of love. I surrender. I trust, and I know that as I surrender, I fall into the arms of love.
As I relax into this moment, God is all there is. This presence, this Spirit, this creative intelligence is operating in and through all things, visible and invisible. It is being me in this unique, individualized body, this form. And I embody this truth, this knowingness, and I am love. I am peace, I am joy, and I am this laughter and this imagination. And I stand and I recognize and I drink in the many, many possibilities that are always before me. And I step into this faith and I lean into this truth that this is the Word. I am this living Spirit. I am this divine magnificence, everywhere present. And as I recognize, I also believe there is no separation between the spiritual and material universe. It is all one. And I am in this complete unity. In grace, in gratitude, I allow my word as spoken. I surrender and I release and I let go and I let God. And together we say,
And so it
and
is.
so it is.
I surrender. I trust, and I know that as I surrender, I fall into the arms of love. I surrender. I trust, and I know that as I surrender, I fall into the arms of love. I fall into the arms of love. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Well, Pierre Tunes, I forgot to mention in the announcements that on a Sunday, before you leave, if you really have something heavy on your heart, our licensed practitioners, I'm going to say that so many times, our licensed practitioners are here for you on a Sunday. They're here for you all the time, but on a Sunday, they donate their services. That's part of their volunteer opportunity. So you can speak to either of them today. And are you in the bookstore today, Margaret? So you're both available today. So if you've got anything niggling at you, speak to one of our fabulous women and have a miracle minute. Okay? All right. Let's do this.
This is a song I wrote a while ago. It's called I Will Grow. Up in the morning, I open my eyes, and what the day brings is a surprise. 'Cause no two are the same, it's the truth I say. A curious mind keeps me coming back, should always stay that way. 'Cause I just wanna see what's coming around the bend, never wanting it to end. Life's a mystery. And I surrender to the flow. And thoughts create my journey, some good, some topsy-turvy. On this epic adventure, I know I will grow. I will grow. I will Every day through the window I say, thanks to your morning glory. The actions I do, the thoughts that come through, add to my life story. My life story. Hey, let's be grateful for what's in our life. The consequence, less strife. Remembering that we can choose love and laughter, trump singing. Blues. Just wanna see what's coming around the bend, never wanting it to end. Life's a mystery. And I surrender to the flow. Thoughts create my journey, some good, some topsy-turvy. On this epic adventure, I know I will grow. I will grow. I will grow.
Our guest today is Barbara Arrowsmith Young. Yay! Yes, please. Barbara is the director of Arrowsmith School and the Arrowsmith program. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Child Studies from the University of Guelph and a master's degree in school psychology from the University of Toronto. Barbara Arrowsmith Young is recognized as the creator of one of the first practical applications of the principles of neuroplasticity to the treatment of learning disorders. She continues to develop programs for students with learning disabilities, and her program of cognitive exercises is implemented in 40 schools in Canada, the US, and Australia. She is the author of the international bestseller, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain. Please put your hands together again for Barbara Arrowsmith Young.
So is this working? Can people hear me? Yeah? Okay, and I just want to thank everybody for coming to hear me speak about what I'm passionate about. And also, I was just almost in tears with the very first song, Teach Your Children Well, because that's the song that I selected to play at both of my parents' memorial services to honor what they had taught me. So that was just, there are no accidents. It was perfect. And I Will Grow. That is, so I thank Pierre for writing that song. I mean, my life has been one of growing. I mean, growing in spirit, growing in face of adversity, in face of challenges and struggles, and just not seeing any other way other than growing, like rising to the opportunity to grow. So thank you. And so I knocked the podium over. So this morning I just want to share my life story and my journey. And really it's a story of passion and of love. Through my life I fell in love with the human brain and its magnificence, and just have learned a tremendous amount about how this incredible organ that we carry with us 24/7 really is a factor in shaping who we are. It filters our perceptions of ourselves and our understanding of ourselves, our understanding of other people, our understanding of our world, and our understanding of our relationship to it. So this incredible organ does shape us, and I'm very passionate about it. And it's also a story of nature and nurture. The nature grows out of my being born with parts of my brain that really weren't working very well or very effectively. And the nurture was that teach your children well. It was what I learned from my parents. My father was an inventor and a scientist, and he really taught me that if there's a problem, don't accept conventional wisdom. If there isn't a solution to that problem, it's one's responsibility to go out and find or create a solution to the problem. So I had that with me throughout life, and my mother was a social activist and an educator, and she taught me be of service to others. I mean, that was a mantra. In fact, she changed our prayer that we said, around the dinner table to include being of service to others. So I grew up with that, and also social activism. Again, very much that we didn't have to live in or accept what the conventional wisdom was. So I feel very blessed that I had the opportunity to be born into that family. And it's also a journey of discovery and hope. Really the hope was that maybe there was another way of being, that I didn't have to accept the limitations that were imposed upon me by the way my brain worked. And discovery was discovering in that journey that I didn't have to live with those limitations. And the story is also personal and universal. The personal was my own struggle with very crippling and very severe learning disabilities. And the universal is I came to understand that every one of us has our own unique cognitive profile of strengths and weaknesses that in part does shape who we are and how we relate to the world and understand the world. And it was also a journey of meeting some remarkable minds. I met some brilliant scientists through this journey. A scientist, Alexander Romanovich Luria, who was a Russian neuropsychologist, and Mark Rosenzweig, who was a psychologist at Berkeley. And it was really through their sharing their brilliance and their knowledge to the world that showed me a light out of the darkness that I was struggling with. So in many cultures, there's a belief that, we owe a life debt to somebody that saves our lives. And Rosenzweig and Luria saved my life. I would not be standing here today if I hadn't come across their work and seen the possibility in that work for changing my life. So I owe a life debt to both of those individuals. And there's a poem that I would like to read that I have in the beginning of my book, and it's by a Russian poet, which is very appropriate, Denis Levertov. And it's a variation on a theme by Rilke, and it really, to me, illustrates the task that I was given and sort of my life's journey. A certain day became a presence to me. There it was, confronting me, a sky, air, light, a being. And before it started to descend from the height of noon, it leaned over and struck my shoulder, as if with the flat of a sword, granting me honor and a task. The day's blow rang out, metallic, or it was I, a bell, awakened. And what I heard was my whole self saying and singing what I knew. I can. And that, if anybody knows people that are struggling with learning disabilities, often what they hear is they can't. And this was my task, was to change that and say that I can. And that task has really shaped my life's journey. So my life and my work are an exploration really of the territory of the brain and how it makes us uniquely who we are, and how understanding this territory, I believe, can give us compassionate insight into ourselves and into others. And compassion is really important to me. One of the things that made me very sad when I did the interviews for my book several years ago, and we probably interviewed a couple of hundred people, was that there's still such a stigma associated with having a learning problem. And I think that is really important to shift. I mean, if you have a learning disorder, it's just something that's not working, and we now know through the application of the principles of neuroplasticity, which simply put is we know our brain isn't fixed. Our brain is capable of change. We can grow new neurons. We can grow dendrites, the branches on the end of neurons. We can increase neurotransmitters. We can strengthen neural connections. We can make new neural connections. I mean, this organ is capable of change. So we don't have to be limited if there's something that isn't working properly in our brain. And through that change, we change the brain physiologically, but more importantly, we change its ability to function, to allow us to learn and to engage more fully in the world. So, and what also is exciting is through my work and the work of other people is there's neuroplasticity through the lifespan, so it's never too late, which as I'm getting older, that's pretty exciting. I've worked with people as old as 74, and they made the same progress as a 6-year-old, so it's really incredible. And some of the schools that offer my program work with adults, and in fact, just a little aside, when I just came back from a tour in Victoria, Vancouver, and Saskatoon of all places, and in Vancouver, in the adult program, I met a 46-year-old woman who was a bus driver in Vancouver, and she kept running into problems because she had a nonverbal difficulty in reading and interpreting social cues. So imagine she was like ticking off every single one of her passengers. So she was getting the night shifts or, getting very few shifts when there were very few people on the bus. And she came to tell me what having worked now on that cognitive function has meant to her. And one thing is she can keep her job, but the more exciting is she's having relationships with people that are enriching and fulfilling rather than people just shunning her and moving away. So I am passionate about this work and its possibility. So my story begins in 1951. And I was born in Toronto in a family, as I said, with a father who was an inventor and a scientist, and a mother who was an educator and a social activist. And I started grade 1 in 1957, and at this time, this was the belief of what I call the pre-neuroplastic paradigm. This was a belief at that time that the brain was fixed. If you had a problem, you just needed to live with it. There was nothing that could be done. Basically, the brain you're born with is the brain that you die with it, and you need to accept that. And in grade 1, I was identified as having a mental block, because at that time there wasn't even the term learning disabilities. So there wasn't, that term didn't get coined until about 1962. So in 1957, let me just grab some water. Still a little painful even thinking about it now. I overheard my grade 1 teacher tell my mother that I had a mental block, that I had a defect, and that I would never learn like other children. And I struggled to learn how to read and to write. I read everything backwards. I wrote backwards. And in fact, when I went to add numbers, if it was 12 plus 13, I would add 21 plus 31, and then I would reverse the answer. So it was very, very frustrating. I do have compassion for my teacher, because nobody else in my class was having that difficulty, and she probably had never encountered somebody that had such a severe learning disability. So I was told, accept my limitations, this is as good as it gets, and basically I was going to struggle for the rest of my life with learning. And it was, quite a hard thing to hear at that time. And I developed all the kind of behaviors that children do that are struggling with learning. I mean, I would put up my hand and go and hide in the washroom for 20 minutes, and, just to escape the classroom. And probably my teacher, she didn't seem to mind. She was probably happy that I was out of the class for those 20 minutes, because she didn't have to deal with me. And I got the strap in grade 1, because those were the days of the strap. And it was interesting when I was talking to young students out west and talked about the strap. They had no idea what that was, which I thought was wonderful, because it doesn't exist anymore. It's not even in their consciousness. But in my day, and again, it was a belief, I think. The teacher was so frustrated, and I think she thought maybe she could beat learning into me. And I was trying as hard as I could, and this was my world, and this is the way I experience things. And that's what it's like for a child that has learning problems. They can be very capable in certain ways and very incapable in other ways. And it can at times present a very confusing picture, which I'm sure was the picture that my teacher saw. And growing up, I later was to discover I had not just one part of my brain that wasn't working, but a number of parts of my brain that weren't working. And one of the most critical ones is the part that understands language and really processes meaning. And if anybody knows the Lewis Carroll poem, The Jabberwocky, which is really pretty unintelligible, it's all nonsense words. And that, when I listen to language, I mean, I heard the words, but that's what it felt like in terms of meaning. It's a part of the brain that grasps meaning. And if you think about like a concept, if we pick a simple concept like a cat, and you think the palm of your hand is the concept, and all your fingers are the elements that have to go together to build that concept, like that it's nocturnal, that it has claws, that it has fur, it's a carnivore. They all come together, and that's like insight, right? You pull these separate pieces together to go, aha, that's what this thing means. Well, in my brain, the part that pulled these pieces of information together to grasp meaning didn't work. So all of meaning to me was like these separate, unrelated pieces. So my world was really very confusing. There was no cause and effect, like why things happened. There was no logic. Even things like jokes, I mean, because I couldn't grasp what people were saying in jokes, so I would learn to laugh when other people did. So I would watch their reactions, and if they were laughing really hard, I thought this must be a really funny joke, so I would match my laughter to them. And having this difficulty made me very vulnerable to con artists, because one of the ways you understand if you're being conned is you see the logical inconsistencies in what people are saying. Well, there was no logic, so I saw no logical inconsistencies. And things like relationships. I couldn't understand how my aunt could also be my mother's sister. I mean, that made no sense to me. I couldn't understand fractions. I mean, I could do 1, put the line under, and put the 4 below, but what's a fraction but a relationship, right? It's 1 part of 4. Well, there were no relationships in my world. And what ended up happening was that very sort of fragmented world led to a very fragmented sense of self. So I became depressed. I struggled with really very low self-esteem, poor self-concept, and just a lot of confusion. My world was very, very confusing. And if that wasn't enough, I had another area that didn't work very well, which was, I later discovered, part of my brain in the right hemisphere that controls sensation on the left side of my body. And it was almost like I'd had a stroke. And I could put this hand on a hot burner, and if I wasn't looking at my hand, I would know that there was pain, but I had no idea where it was coming from. I once slammed a car door on my head with this hand and fractured a tooth. Yes, it was. My mother was convinced I would be dead by the age of 5 because I was so accident prone. I've got a scar up here on my head where I ran into the front fender of my parents' car when I was 4. I was really accident prone. If I went to walk through a door, I'd most likely bounce off the side of the door with the left side because I didn't know where that side of my body was in space. And imagine when I started to learn how to drive. I didn't know where the left side of that car was in space. So the whole left side of my parents' car was like dented and scratched and scraped because of that difficulty. And obviously, nobody wanted me on their sports team, and rightfully so, because I was not an asset, right? I mean, if a ball was coming at me, my first inclination would be to run as quickly as I could in the other direction, because I couldn't judge where I was relative to that ball. So with the one problem, I wasn't good academically. I struggled with comprehension, mathematics, understanding. This one, I was terrible athletically. And then I had another problem, which I call a spatial difficulty. I couldn't imagine three-dimensional space. Like, there were no maps in my brain. So as a child, I would get lost in the houses of my friends. Crossing the street for me was terrifying, because if you think about crossing the street, you're creating a map of how far you are from that car as it's approaching you. And since there were no maps in my head, I had no idea where I was relative to that car. And I used to joke that I would be as safe crossing the street with my eyes closed as I would be with my eyes open. And there was truth to that, because I just could not judge. So again, as a child with a learning problem, I developed compensations. So I would stand at the side of the street and wait 10, 15 minutes until someone else would come along and cross, and then I would cross with them, hoping that they knew what they were doing, because I certainly didn't. Or I walk blocks and blocks and blocks out of my way to find either a stop sign or a stoplight to cross where I knew the traffic had to be stopped. So again, it's having these struggles. I created workarounds or compensations, but they take so much extra energy and effort, because they're trying to do something that they're not really designed to do. Like, they're trying to fill a hole for an area that isn't functioning. So that was my my growing up, and things like learning how to sew. If you think about a pattern, like anytime going from one-dimensional space to three-dimensional space, I couldn't make that transition or translation in my brain. So, home economics was a struggle. Like, I spent more time ripping out seams than I did actually sewing them, because I sewed things upside down, backwards, because of the diagram, I could not translate that. And then, when IKEA came on the scene, and, you have to build those bookcases, that was really fun. So, the shelves were going upside down, the back was going backwards. Eventually I just learned that, it was better not to do it and get somebody else to do it. But, I talk a lot about, in those times, I factored in what I called lost time, because I always knew I was going to be lost. I was going to be lost either in the world of language, and it was going to take me much longer to process things. In fact, reading a page in a book, I might have to read it 20 or 30 times before I would understand the meaning. Or lost time, because whenever I go anywhere, out in the world, I knew I'd get lost. So I'd have to add extra time to allow for being lost. And as I've come to learn, and research is told us, that some of these problems are inherited. And my mother and I both had the spatial difficulty. So it was always fun when she and I would get into a car. And she called it an adventure. So we knew where we were starting from, because we were there, and we knew where we wanted to get to, but we had no idea. It was like a black hole in between. There were no maps in either of our world. So we get in the car, she'd point it in the direction that we wanted to go, and eventually we would get there, but we never ever got there the same way twice. She had that difficulty, and she had wanted to be a scientist and study chemistry, and she hadn't been able to because of that difficulty. Because if you think of, she wanted to study organic chemistry, and you have to build those molecules, right? You have to build spatial maps of the molecules and how they all work, and she couldn't do that. So it limited where she really wanted to go, and it did at times make the world interesting in terms of where we ended up. So So that was sort of the beginnings. That was my life, sort of struggling academically, struggling socially, like just being able to understand what people were saying, struggling athletically. I really was not very good. And I felt a lot of shame, I mean, growing up. Like, I knew there was something different about me. I mean, I could just look at my classmates, and they were managing to function in ways that I couldn't. And you know, given that my father and mother had instilled in me that kind of attitude of looking beyond, you know, what's conventionally given and hunting for a solution. And there were moments of despair. When I was 13, I attempted to end my life because I just couldn't imagine how could I go on to high school if I could barely function in elementary school. And luckily, because of learning disability, I wasn't very successful. I didn't get the instructions right. So there was a blessing to having that learning disability. And thankfully, I'm here today, and it wasn't my time, obviously. And I remember it very well, in August of 1977, I came across a book that changed my life. It was called The Man with the Shattered World, and it was written by Alexander Luria, the Russian neuropsychologist. And he told the story of a man called Leo Vysotsky, who had been a soldier in World War II. In Russia, and he'd had a bullet hole wound to a very specific part of his brain. And this book was Vysotsky telling his story. He kept a journal for 40 years trying to make sense of his world. And as I read Vysotsky's story, I thought, this man is living my life, and I'm living his life. All of the things that he couldn't do, I couldn't do. Now, I knew I didn't have a bullet to my brain, but now I knew that it was my brain that wasn't working. He couldn't grasp concepts. He couldn't tell time. Up until the age of 25, I could not read an analog clock because it's a relationship. And Vysotsky could before the wound, but afterwards he couldn't. He couldn't understand mathematics. He'd been brilliant at math before. So now I knew where my problem was. And my father had always said, before you can solve a problem, you have to understand what it is you're trying to solve. So this was my first kind of aha moment. And then at the same time, I came across another line of research which I needed to fit in the puzzle, which was the work of Rosenzweig in Berkeley. And he was working with rats and demonstrating neuroplasticity, which this was in the kind of early 60s. And nobody was really thinking about neuroplasticity because people believed the brain was fixed. But he was demonstrating this with rats and showing that if you gave them lots of enrichment and stimulation and toys to play with and other rats to interact with, their brains actually changed physiologically. And they also became better learners. They learned better on mazes, which are like little rat intelligence tests. And so he put down a challenge at the end of one of his articles in 1966. And he said, can we take what we've learned from animals, from rats, in terms of the brain's ability to change, and can we apply this to human learning? And I thought, my whole life has been a challenge, so and I'm desperate, and so maybe I can take on this challenge. And I thought, what do I have to lose but time? And I'm already losing that. So that was the beginning of my journey, coming across these two lines of work and fitting it in with my very, very specific struggle. So I think, you know, if there is anything like a divine plan, it feels like almost from birth I was moved in this direction to create this work, and being open to the challenges and the opportunities to move in that direction. And so I decided to try and create the first exercise for myself, and had no idea whether it would work because there was no evidence to suggest that, you know, this was possible in human beings. And so I created an exercise using clocks. Not that I wanted to get better at telling time, but I can actually read a clock now. But I wanted to make that part of my brain process relationships. And that's what a clock is seeing the relationship between the hour and minute hand. And I, at the beginning, was abysmally poor at it. And actually had to have a friend help me because I couldn't tell time. But eventually I got really fast and really accurate. And then I thought, okay, this is great, but I'm not really experiencing any change. So I added a third hand to force more complexity, to like another relationship to hold. And, you know, that seemed to go fairly well, and I got fast and accurate. And then I added a fourth hand, and it was now forcing my brain to process and hold 4 relationships. And at the end of that level of the cognitive exercise, my world changed significantly. I was living proof of human neuroplasticity. I could start now to listen to a conversation and understand as people were talking to me. And before, I'd never been able to do that. I had almost a verbatim auditory memory, so I would memorize everything that I heard. I would go away, and maybe 3 hours later, I'd say, oh, that's what Mary was talking about. But Mary was now at the grocery store or somewhere else. I mean, there was no opportunity to have a conversation because it was long after the time. And now I could start to understand things as people were actually talking to me. And I decided to test myself. And I'd always wanted to read philosophy, and I had access to a philosophy library. So I pulled a book off the shelf. And if anybody knows philosophy, it's very conceptually dense. So I had never been able to read it. And I opened it a page at random. I read the page, and I understood what I was reading as I was reading it. And I thought, maybe this is a fluke. Maybe I just picked a really, really easy book. So I pulled another book off the shelf, opened it, and understood it. And by the time I was finished, I had a pile of like 100 books surrounding me. It was sort of like I was in my little book cave. And I had been able to understand each page as I had read it. And this had been impossible. So then I decided to go back and teach myself all of mathematics, because my father had been a mathematician, and he had conveyed a love for math, even though I didn't quite see what he was in love with. And I could now understand the concepts, and I could see what he talked about, like sort of the tapestry of the logic. And so I taught myself elementary, high school, and college level math, and really actually enjoyed it. So then I thought, what can I do with this work? Can I, it's benefited me in this area. And then I did develop an exercise for that kinesthetic part of my body, the clumsy, accident-prone, klutzy part of me. And for that one, I knew I had to do something with my eyes closed, because to compensate, if you don't know where your body's in space, you're watching what it's doing. So I created this exercise where I had to draw shapes with my eyes closed until I was as accurate as I was with my eyes open. And now, where's that glass? I can demonstrate. So I can actually pick this up with my left hand. Before, if I had picked this up, I would either be wearing it, you might be wearing it, it might be over my shoulder, so the curtain might be wearing it, because I couldn't regulate the movements on that side of my body. I now have a functional left side of my body, and the good news is I'm no longer a danger to myself. I don't think I'll ever, be on the Olympic team for any sports, but I can play sports, and my car is not dented on the left side anymore, which, is really quite wonderful. And then I developed an exercise for that spatial part of my brain, which was another part. And now I don't get lost. I can actually find my way to places, and I can read maps. And I actually prefer maps to a GPS, because it's so much fun that I can actually hold the map in my head, and I can rotate it in my head. I can play chess, whereas I couldn't play chess before because it's all the spatial moves. And I can actually build IKEA bookcases without, having to dismantle them partway through. So I knew now that there was value in harnessing this concept, or this thing called neuroplasticity, to take this knowledge and start to see if I could apply it to other people with other problems. And that was the beginning of my work, and I started listening to people very deeply that were coming to me to describe the kinds of problems they had, and then going back into Luria's work, who described what these different brain areas do. And now I have programs for 19 different parts of the brain, from nonverbal reading, visual memory, so the child is dyslexic that can't, hold the word cat, they can't see it in their head, to motor plans for writing, to auditory memory, to be able to hold information, a whole range of cognitive functions. And the other thing that I've really learned, from this work is what I call cognitive mismatches, which I find really quite fascinating, is where, we all have our own unique cognitive profile of strengths and weaknesses, and nobody really has everything in place. And when it ends up being a learning disability, it's when multiple areas have piled up to make learning very difficult. But given that I work with adults, I hear a lot about people coming to me where they're in a profession or a vocation that there's a piece that they have that doesn't quite meet the demands of the task that's being asked of them. And in one case, I had a pilot who had the auditory memory problem. And if you think about, as you're flying into needing to land, the air traffic controller is giving you a series of instructions. So this person, this pilot, had developed a strategy of getting the air traffic controller to repeat the instructions over and over and over again, so he'd remember them. But I always used to worry, what if that air traffic controller was really busy and he couldn't repeat those instructions? So I used to ask him if I was ever getting on a plane to tell me where he was flying, so I would avoid the airspace. But the better news is we addressed the problem, and he won't make that kind of mistake. But these things that we think of human error, I had a butcher that came to me once, and I did do an assessment with him, but I almost didn't have to. Like, he came in and his whole left hand was swathed in bandages, and he had that kinesthetic problem. So imagine if your job is using a sharp implement in this hand, and you don't know where this hand is. He was seriously a danger to himself, and he was cutting himself all the time. And again, we addressed that problem, and he was able to continue his career as a butcher without, losing any digits. And then another part of the brain is in the right hemisphere that holds the picture of something. So if you're good here, you remember landmarks. You can navigate through space through remembering, oh yeah, the red house with the mailbox, I turn right. But if you have a problem here, you don't hold pictures. So you don't hold images. It's hard to meditate because you can't hold the image of the beach or your happy place. But I had an adult who was doing his residency in pathology, and he had this difficulty. He was at a teaching hospital in the US. And he was diligent and careful, and he didn't know he had this difficulty. And he was examining breast tissue, a slide of breast tissue, and it was a woman that had had breast cancer, and she'd had chemotherapy and radiation, and so now it was to see, is she in remission? And he was just about to sign off, yes, she's in remission. And his supervisor came and pointed up the top of the slide and said, didn't you see these cells here? This is cancer. And at that point, he knew that he needed to exit his program to address that problem. And again, he will never make that kind of mistake. But as I said, I've fallen in love with the human brain and just all of the ways like things can subtly go wrong, and that we can change that. We can make a difference. So I just kind of want to end up here because we're getting close to the end. If I think about what have I learned, I've learned lots of things over the years, but one of the things I think that all of us have, this kind of creative spark in us, this possibility to move beyond limitations. I think we all have that within ourselves, and all the times that we're kind of presented with barriers or something that's an obstacle to movement forward. I think it's just kind of going inside and connecting with that essence of ourselves, and that we have the ability to move through that, and also in community to, if I didn't have had the community of my parents, my family, Luria, Rosenzweig, all of the people that have walked through my door that have taught me so much, I wouldn't be here doing this work. And for me, what is this work? What is the essence of this work? I see it as freeing energy to dance with the universe. And that's what I've committed my life to. And I thank you for letting me come and talk to you this morning and share my passion with you.
Thank you so much. Wow. I just got to say, hats off to your parents, because as a parent, I can't even imagine the knot of fear that they must have had on a daily basis with you.
They did.
Wow. Wow, how inspiring. Wow. Barbara will be out front after service signing copies of her book. And they are selling for a low price of $20. So if you want, head on out there. And you also are free to answer questions of anybody out there as well. So this is the portion of the service where are my tithing sticks? This is where we give back. And I had my, see, I'm all over the place here. Ta-da! On a Sunday, if you're wondering why some of us are holding colored sticks, we're in the Count Me In program, which we do pre-authorized donations, weekly, monthly, bi-weekly. So rather than putting an envelope in the basket every week, we hold up our sticks so that we can still participate. So this is the time when we pass the basket and we sing and we give of our good back to the center. And as Reverend Jonathan always says, please don't give from a place of obligation. Money is energy, and it's a circulation. And if you're giving out of obligation, you're blocking the flow. Raymond Charles Barker, who wrote The Power of Decision, fantastic book, love it. I pulled one of his quotes out. It says, one of the great benefits that comes with the realization that money is God in action is that of the intelligent use of money. Integrity and sincerity are key items in a correct prosperity consciousness. Love that. So, together, let's sing God is My Source. If you need it in the book, it's number 13. And feel free to stand on up and join us. 1, 2, 3.
God is my source, God is my power, God gives me everything I need. So I give thanks for all my blessings, God gives me everything I need. Joy is my source, joy is my power, joy gives me everything that I need. So I give thanks for all my blessings. Joy gives me everything that I need. Love is my source. Love is my power. Love gives me everything that I need. So I give thanks for all my blessings. Love gives me everything that I need. God is my source, God is my power, God gives me everything I need. So I give thanks for all my blessings, God gives me everything I need. God is my source, God is my power, God gives me everything I need.
Thank you. And here I go back again. Yeah, ooh. I would just like to take a few moments to express some gratitude. First and foremost, to all of you. Sorry, what? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Say.
The MC is brilliant. Our brilliant MC.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mary Ellen Cassie, our licensed practitioner, is going to do a blessing.
I'm going to be so licensed.
You are so licensed. She is going to bless the offering.
Knowing that there is only one power and one source, this is a time of gratitude and giving thanks for all the words that were shared, the movement inside my being, my heart, in everyone's presence, knowing that these gifts in the basket is just money moving, flowing. I believe in this law of circulation. I release and I let go. There's no holding on, and I allow this growth of the center, the growth of the community, the growth of each and every one of us. And I say yes to this universe. I say yes even when I do not know. And it's from this blessed moment and this being. I release, I surrender, I trust, and I let go. The board, our dear minister, this community, this band, this is a celebration of us one, being, living, breathing, and flowing. And so it is.
So it is. Thank you, Mary Ellen. So, as I was saying, thank you all for coming out on this beautiful, sunny, kind of warmer, getting less snowy day. Appreciate that. Navigating the slippery puddles and goop and stuff that's out there. There are other people to thank. Set up this morning, we had Margaret Ann and Susan. Greeters were Carmen and Derek. In the bookstore, we have Lorna, our licensed practitioner, Mary Ellen. Board members on duty today are Jim and Judy. In the sound booth is Brian. Where are you, Brian? He's doing double duty today. The dynamic kids, Mahala and Chris. Yay! And thank you to Patricia Clark, who's out managing Barbara's book table. On the camera, hi Lou and Tony, thank you very much. And, oh, there's a note from Deja, or from Margaret and MC, thank you. Okay, yes, thank you. Yeah. And the band. Pierre, Stephen, Patrick, the invisible Rudy, and Brian, who's doing double duty, playing bass as well as doing sound up in the booth. So thank you all for coming. And next week, Helen Vallot will be speaking. And then the week after that, Reverend Jonathan is back. And I think that's all I have to say. And thank you again, Barbara Arrowsmith Young. That's very, very, very inspiring. So anytime I have a moment of like mental math, and it's like, that's just nothing in the grand scheme of things. So thank you so very, very much. And I'm going to call Mary Ellen back up because we're going to do our quiet moment again.
Right now, or when you're singing and stopping?
Yeah, we'll sing a little bit, and then you do your cooking, and then we'll take over again.
In the silence there is peace. In the silence there is unspoken joy. In the silence there's release. As my heart opens up to the voice, I awake to this precious moment when I hear all that could ever be said, and right here in this holy silence I find God, I find myself.
And as I relax in this moment, and I stand in this love, knowing that I am grateful, I am peace and I am love. knowing there are no accidents, no coincidences, I step into this present moment that is all there is. And I celebrate this oneness, the gift of each and every one of you, the gift of myself. And I stand in this freedom of knowing that there are no boundaries and no limits. I open myself to receive. And in this benediction, I know that we step out into the world, and into the world I bring my love. I bring my unique, individualized expression of the Spirit. I am who I am, and who I am is perfect, whole, and complete. And I am the living Spirit, always and in all ways. It is in grace and gratitude I release these words. I celebrate each and every one of us. I let go and I let God, and together we say, and so it is.
In the silence there is peace. In the silence there is unspoken joy. In the silence there's release. As my heart opens up to the voice, I awake to these precious moments when I hear all that could ever be said, and right here in this holy silence I find God, I find myself.
Let's shake it up a bit. Number 27, God is my source. Let's rock it out of here.
No, God makes me want to sing.
All right, God makes me want to sing. Yeah. Even better. Number 27. Have a great week, everybody. Join us for coffee and chat. And Barbara. And feel free to stand.
I can't help it. God makes me want to sing. I can't help it. God makes me want to sing. It makes me feel so good. I can do most anything, yeah. So I am loving every living thing.
Everything, every living thing.
I can see the face of God in paupers and kings.
Kings, paupers and kings.
No questions, no less or more. We all got the same treasures in store, so I'm loving every living thing. Come on! I can't help it. God makes me want to sing. I can't help it. God makes me want to sing. It makes me feel so good. I could do most anything, yeah. So I'm believing in my guiding light.
In my light, in my guiding light.
Well, no matter what comes, it always turns out right.
Everything turns out right.
I just
take a deeper breath and then I grab the wheel. So I'm believing. Oh, not lying. Oh, I can't help it. God makes me wanna sing. I can't help it. God makes me wanna sing. Ooh, it makes me wanna sing. It makes me feel so good. I could do almost anything, yeah. So I'm rising, whoa, to a higher place. To a higher place. With the wind at my back and a smile upon my face. With a smile upon my face. Well, living a dream a little more each day. And it keeps getting easier to find my way. So I'm rising, oh, to a higher place. Come on! I can't help it. God makes me wanna sing. I can't help it. God makes me wanna sing. You know it makes me feel so good I could do most anything. It's all your turn now. Come on. I can't help it. God makes me wanna sing. I can't help it. God makes me wanna sing. It makes me feel so good I can do most anything. Oh, let's bring it home. I can't help it. God makes me wanna sing. God makes me wanna sing. I can't help it. God makes me wanna sing. Yeah. It makes me feel so good I can do most anything. Yeah.